forget it. So once more, welcome. And this meeting is dedicated to friendship societies in Europe. And I will shortly introduce the background of this meeting, how we've got the idea of this meeting. We've met first time with our colleagues from Danish-Russian Association and the Great Britain-Russia Society in April this year, when the Danish-Russian Association was having its 100-year anniversary. And we were a big honor to be invited to this anniversary. Thanks once more for the invitation. And in this meeting, we also discussed further cooperation, because we noticed that our organizations are somehow in the same situation. And even though we have been in different countries and having our own histories in our countries, somehow we have had also some common steps to forward, even after the year 2022. And we decided then that we would like to have some common continuation for this start, and this is why we decided to organize this kind of event, where we collect these three friendship organizations and look at the similarities and differences that our organizations have had. Of course, this can be only the start of something. I know that there are some other also organizations in Europe that we still don't know, but maybe in the future we can still spread our network and make it even larger. But today we start looking at the history of those three organizations, and it will be very interesting for all of us. We have tonight four excellent experts, two from Finland, one from Great Britain, and one from Denmark, and every one of them will have 20 minutes for their speech. And we have also time for the questions and discussion. Some words about the Finland-Russia Society, about the current situation. We will have today two presentations on Finland's situation, so I'm not going very deep. But in Finland-Russia Society, we have at the moment around 5,000 members, individual members, who are paying membership fee yearly. And we have still almost 100 local organizations in our roof organization in different cities of Finland. So our organization is located in all parts of Finland. Of course, the situation after Russia's full-scale invasion through Ukraine has changed our situation a lot, and we also have some difficulties, and also we have had to seek for new ways of living and working, and we have found them. We can discuss also them later if you have interest, but at the moment I'm quite positive way that somehow I think that our society will survive all these difficulties. And even though we can see the future, how the things in the world are going to be developing, still I think that our organization will find its way to live in Europe and in Finland. So this is a short introduction of our society, and now we will go to the history and to more deep in this topic, and we will start our discussion and evening from the history of the friendship societies in Europe, because it was something new also for me that actually Finland-Russia Society is not the only one in the Europe, but it's actually very big history and big links between different countries in history, and that's it's good to start with the common view on the movement of friendship organizations in history, and we have a very good expert that we are using a lot in our events, Pia Koivunen, senior lecturer from Turku University. Warmly welcome, Pia, once again to our meetings, and floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. And just a second, I'll share my slides. Okay, I hope you can see them now.
Yes.
So, great. So, my name is Pia Koivunen, and I'm a specialist in Russian and Soviet history, especially on cultural diplomacy and cultural exchanges during the Cold War years. And this topic is really huge and really wide, so I'm not going to go very much into details. I'll leave those for the rest of the speakers, but I'll rather give a short overview of the Soviet friendship societies from the early 1920s to the post 1991 situation. And even though there's no Soviet in the topic, I will mostly speak from the Soviet perspective. I'm Soviet Russian historian, so that's my take to the topic. But first, what were or what are friendship societies? They are bilateral, non-governmental organizations that support cooperation, especially cultural ties between two countries. They often don't have direct links to governments or states, but of course, they may have, for example, politicians in there as members. So that's how they can be also connected to governments and states. And of course, Soviet Union was here a special case. And for the Soviet Union, friendship societies served as a one form of cultural diplomacy, which they used for improving the image of the country and also for gaining foreign policy aims. After the October Revolution, a new kind of state, a new kind of society was created that was based on socialism, and that's often been called the sort of great experiment. They tested for the first time in world history how a society based on socialism would work and would function. This new experiment was both feared and embraced. Many governments were afraid that the revolution would spread beyond Russian or Soviet borders and would also spread to their own countries and perhaps overthrow their governments. And that's why they were afraid of this new kind of experiment. Then again, many Western intellectuals were interested in this new type of organizing a society, and they were interested in and fascinated about this experience. However, Soviet Union was, especially during the early years, seen as sort of a pariah state. It was not recognized by major powers. For example, the US recognized it only in 1933. So what the Soviet Union needed was ways to improve the image of the country, and friendship societies were one of the ways to do this, and one of the ways try to spread information about the country, to get recognition from other states, and find new friends and new ways of collaboration. Friendship as a concept had long roots in socialist movement and in Russian revolutionary thinking. It was also used later as a vehicle or as a rhetorical diplomatic instrument in international relations, for example, in bilateral treaties. For example, in the treaty between Finland and Soviet Union, there was this friendship, cooperation, and mutual assistance. During the interwar period, friendship was used as a metaphor of good relations and in building loyalties between friends. And in the post-war period, a friend was more like someone who set the values, political doctrines, and calls for the future with the Soviet Union. So there was sort of a shift in the use of the term between the interwar period and the post-war period. And here are some examples of the use of the term friendship. It became one of the key words in Soviet propaganda throughout its history. There are different examples of friendship between Soviet Union and other countries. Well, then about friendship societies in the interwar period, so in the 1920s and 1930s. During that period, the Soviet friendship societies aimed at gathering potential supporters for the Soviet cause, mainly among left-wing intellectuals. The main function of the friendship societies was to disseminate information on the Soviet Union and socialism, and especially from the Soviet perspective, because there was a lot of hostile attitudes, especially in the Western countries, among the non-leftist circles. During the interwar period, there were a small number of associations founded. There was British Society for Cultural Relations with the USSR, founded in 1924. Then Friends of the Soviet Union in Norway, 1926, and Belgo-Soviet Friendship Society in 1929, and also some others. During this time in the 1920s and 30s, the friendship societies had connections to the communist parties and Communist International and didn't hide these connections. However, they preferred to have non-party members as members in the friendship societies, because the Soviets thought they were more valuable supporters for their cause, because they wanted to show that the support for the Soviet Union was not only among communists, but also in other circles too. One of the most well-known campaigns during the interwar period was the campaign against fascism in the 1930s, where the friendship societies were part of this sort of popular front, where different leftist organizations and parties united to fight against fascism in Europe. Also, one notable thing in the 1930s were the visits of Western intellectuals to the Soviet Union to see this new great experiment where these Western intellectuals were taken to model factories and kolkhozes and educational institutions to see how the new society was developing. And here you can see one of the outcomes of these visits, Sydney and Beatrice Webb's book, Soviet Union, A New Civilization, which they wrote after their visit to the Soviet Union. Then World War II made a radical shift in the friendship between Soviet Union and many of their friends in the West. The Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and Soviet Union was established in 1939, and that disappointed many supporters of the anti-fascist Popular Front. They were really disappointed and felt betrayed by this treaty between arch enemy and the Soviet Union. Then again, a new shift took place a couple of years later when the alliance between the US, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union was established, and that marked a kind of huge change in Soviet foreign policy. That also led to the abolishment of Communist International, and new type of societies with the Allies were created to support the fighting spirit and create the unity among the Allied nations. World War II and its outcome radically changed the Soviet position in world politics. It was now one of the winners in the war, and this new position paved way for the new type of friendship societies also. So in the post-war world, the friendship societies, they were still non-governmental organizations. However, they often had good relations to the Soviet governments and to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and also with the communist parties in other socialist countries. One of the differences between the interwar and the post-war friendship societies was that they tried to distance themselves from the communist terminology. The key concepts were often peace, friendship, mutual understanding, and democracy, to mention only a few. And also another difference was that these post-war associations were based on the Soviet idea of people-to-people diplomacy, Народная дипломатия, which aimed at finding support to Soviet foreign policy among Western working class and progressive intellectuals. So the idea was to form mass organizations, or even, much wider organizations that the friendship societies had been during the interwar period, when they have been only or mainly targeting intellectuals. One of the most well-known campaigns during the Cold War or early Cold War was the Stockholm Appeal to ban nuclear weapons, that the friendship societies were also part in, with many other organizations and people. Until the mid-1950s, the work of the friendship societies was much centered in in the home countries of these associations, because the Soviet Union was very xenophobic and isolated during the what is often called the late Stalin period, so up until 1953, and only very few delegations could visit the USSR between the end of World War II and the death of Stalin. And it was mainly only the Soviet delegations that traveled abroad, or artistic delegations, or the Friendship Society delegations. Then from the mid-1950s, when the Khrushchev's thaw and peaceful coexistence policy began, the focus also with the friendship societies was put more on cultural exchange, tourism, international events, and educational contacts, and that continued also throughout the period up until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Here are a list of few friendship societies in Western Europe. Finland Soviet Union Society was among the first ones that were established after the end of the World War II. Then there was France USSR Association, British Soviet Friendship Society that was refounded in 1946, and that united several associations that had functioned during the interwar period. I'm sure we will hear more about this soon. Also, Italy USSR Society was founded in this period, and as well as Association for German Soviet Friendship and Sweden Soviet Union Society. And the picture here is the membership card of the France Soviet Union Society. And this is only a few of these organizations. There was unfortunately no room for listing all of them, but I took some of the most the earliest associations. The friendship societies during the post-war period were established in different part of the world, not only in Europe. And according to one estimate, by 1959 there were 25 societies created. Some estimates give higher numbers, but unfortunately there is so little research done on the topic that I didn't get quite. I wasn't sure about the numbers, but more research should be done on the topic. It needs to be stressed that there were different types of national cases depending on the circumstances in different countries. For example, in West Germany, where communist organizations were forbidden, the Friendship Society was actually very much needed in keeping up with the relations with the Soviet Union. Then again, in Finland, the Finland Soviet Union Society was embraced by almost by all politicians since the 1970s. The earlier period was a bit different, but Simo will certainly tell you more about this case. But it can be said that friendship societies were not just marionettes of Soviet propaganda. They were very much influenced by their respective national political climates and cultures, as well as the national communist parties. And also Soviet Union allowed varying approaches for different national friendship societies. And this also makes the stories of friendship societies in different countries very different. But it can be said that friendship societies functioned between high politics and civil society in many ways.
Yeah, 2 minutes left.
Yes, okay, I'm approaching the end soon. Just a couple of words about the situation after the collapse of the Soviet Union. There were basically three types of developments. Some of the societies just ceased to exist. For example, the Gesellschaft für Deutsch-Sowjetische Freundschaft, the GDR Soviet Union Society. Some of the countries continued with new names. They changed their name, replaced Soviet Union with Russia in their names, like the Finland-Russia Society and Swedish-Russian Friendship Society. And then some of the organizations or new type of organizations and new forms of organizations were established. For example, Deutsch-Russische Forum was founded, and then in Austria, the old Austrian Soviet Friendship Society ceased to exist in 1991. But Austrian-Russian Friendship Society was founded then again in 2000. So this is the case mainly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But this is something that hasn't been studied much. So this is something that I think should be studied more. And I'll finish by showing you just a couple of books that my talk was based on. If you are interested in reading more about the topic. There are a few books about the Western fellow travelers, David Coates' book and Paul Hollander's book. Many of you might know these. Also, Ludmila Stern's book about Western intellectuals and the Soviet Union tells about the interwar period, and Michael David Fox's book about showcasing the Great Experiment, but Soviet cultural diplomacy, and also about the friendship societies. And my last slide, a couple of more books. If you read German, there is Jan Berend's book about Soviet-Polish friendship, Sonja Grossman's book about Western friendship societies, and then Rachel Applebaum's book about Soviet-Czechoslovak friendship, not only about friendship societies, but also on them. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your questions later.
Thank you, Pia. Great presentation, and you covered many topics in very short time. We are very happy, and we would have time for one question for Pia if someone wants to lift hand, and if you have some short question to Pia now, it's possible on this topic. If not, we will have later time during the discussion at the end. I don't see now any hands, so let's think about the questions in the last part of our seminar tonight. And let's move to next topic, which is actually one of the oldest part of this friendship movement. We were told that 1920s was the start of the friendship movement, and Danish-Russian Association was established already in the first waves of this movement, 1924. And we have Kim Frederiksen from Danish-Russian Association. Warmly welcome to our discussion. And you have written something about the history of this association, and we are very happy to have you here today. I have thought that you are from Copenhagen, but you are actually from Odense. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I will share my screen.
Yes,
and thank you
can
for
do it.
If it will work. That is strange. Not working.
You should have the share button in the below. Can you see it?
But for some reason it's not working. But anyway, thank you for having me. I will try to sort this out while I speak. I should be supposed to approve that you share, but that I share this, but nothing happens.
Okay. There is
let's see here. Now something is happening.
Okay.
Instead of you seeing me spend all my time trying to get this working.
Now we can see now yes.
So hopefully you can see my screen now. And yes, I wrote a booklet about the Danish-Russian Association. Just to give a brief presentation of myself, I hold a PhD in history, and I'm an independent scholar specializing in Cold War, communism, and cultural diplomacy studies. As I said, early in 2024, I was asked by the Danish-Russian Association to write a booklet, and it was published. I hope you can see it in relation with the 100th anniversary of the organization, which makes it the oldest still existing and active organization for bilateral relations with Russia. I should also disclose that I was a member of this association until the 22nd of February 2022, when I left as a direct consequence of the full-scale Russian invasion. So today I'm truly an independent scholar and researcher on this subject. So here's also a picture of the book. It falls in four periods, 1917 to 1940 or 1941. That is the interwar years and until the German occupation of Denmark and the attack on the Soviet Union. The Cold War years, the reorganization of the association at the end of the Cold War, and until the time of the small-scale Russian invasion in 2014. And then the last years. For today's presentation, my focus is the activities. I will touch upon organizational questions and development as well, and then I will try to draw a few conclusions at the end. So, as was the case across Europe during the last quarter of the 19th century, a labor movement developed. It was in its nature social democratic. It based itself on three legs: the party, the trade unions, and the corporate movement. During the early 20th century, this Marxist reformist movement was challenged by a Marxist revolutionary movement, and this was also the case in Denmark. In the years leading to World War I, opposition both within the Social Democratic Party and in the trade union movements rose, and left-wing figures broke away from the party. This process was accelerated by the World War and the Bolshevik coup d'etat. In Denmark, it resulted in the founding of parties and trade union oppositions to the left of the Social Democrats. This left-wing movement held a number of leading figures, but in connection with the developments of the earliest incarnations of the Danish-Russian Association, three figures played a key role. They were the famous writer Martin Andersen Nexø, the key Soviet figure in Denmark, O. Jørgensen, and the first Danish female communist, Marie Nielsen. We see them in the picture in the upper left-hand corner. I apologize for the poor quality, but it's the only one in existence since O. Jørgensen and Marie Nielsen hated each other, and only their friendship with Nexø made them cooperate. Following the 1921 famine in the Volga regions, they organized the Committee for Helping Russia. It collected funds and clothes for the famine victims. At the same time, an orphanage in Samara was opened in Nexø's name. Nexø, together with his wife, visited the orphanage and also organized financial aid for it. In 1923, Nexø published a book on his impressions of Soviet Russia and gave a number of public lectures. Following this, he decided to reorganize the committee as something else called Komsom Rus. Very little is known about this organization, which was supposed to organize cultural exchange and develop Danish-Russian business relations, but it seems to have been very inactive.
Kim, sorry, 1 minute. Are you changing the slides? Because we can see the slides changing at the moment. can you put the slide mode?
Sorry, what's the? I'm not entirely sure what the problem is.
It's also possible because we saw only the first slide. If
You still have only seen the first slide?
Yes.
It's not changing now?
No, now we can see at all the slides.
You cannot see the slides.
If you want, I can try to share the slides because I have them.
Yeah.
Do you want?
Just if I do like this, is a different slide showing now?
Wait a minute. No, we can't see any slides. Maybe I'll try to open my slides. Can you see them now? And if I change it to...
I'm just going to try something. This is strange. They changed now, like they're supposed to, right? Or did you change them?
I was changing them.
Yeah.
Kim, please keep continue.
Yeah.
I try to share the slides and try to get them. You can continue your story.
It's not helping now, or?
Yes, now we can see them changing.
Okay, that's amazing. So basically, we were here. So it's like 2 or 3 slides you missed. But I hope it's working now. So in 1924, Nexø left Denmark and moved to Weimar, Germany. He was disillusioned with the meager results of the Communist Party and the Komsomolsk. A group of persons centered around the Social Democrat Georg Bolgan met on the 23rd of April 2024 in a restaurant in Copenhagen and founded Dansk-Russisk Samvirke. It was a hybrid organization of intellectuals, cultural workers, teachers, and professors. They organized many concerts of classical music, public lectures and exhibitions of children's books, agricultural developments, and even a visit from this famous ship Aurora. But membership figures stayed low, about 110 persons, all living in the greater Copenhagen area. In 1927, a delegation of Danish workers with communist sympathies traveled to the USSR to participate in the November celebrations and to participate in the founding Congress of the Friends of the Soviet Union, where the Congress had about 1,000 participants from 43 countries. A sort of friendship international with headquarters first in Germany and later in the Netherlands, with national sections in different countries, not unlike the way national communist parties were sections of the Communist International. In Denmark, work started slowly. Not until 1930 did an actual organization form. But there seems to have been very few activities prior to 1933 or 1934. So at this time, 2 Danish-Soviet friendship associations existed at the same time, and this was also the case in a number of other countries. The Danish Friends of the Soviet Union was much clearer on its communist and Soviet sympathies. Also, it aimed more at the general public. It had 3,000 to 4,000 members at its height around 1937. And with local branches across Denmark and a large number of local branches in Copenhagen. SUF published various journals with articles on Soviet domestic and foreign policy and socio-economic developments, travel impressions, book reviews, a letterbox, and op-eds on Soviet foreign policy by Professor A.D. Stender-Petersen and later the communist high school teacher Peter Rode. Especially the op-eds represented the worldview of the organization. There was a general agreement and understanding that the purpose of the organization was based on a certain ideological position, political belief system, and worldview. Throughout the years, they defended the Great Terror, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet invasion of Poland, the Baltics, and Finland. The SUV also organized evening school language classes of Russian and other languages spoken in the USSR, such as Yiddish. Every year, numerous public lectures on similar topics, as those mentioned before, took place. In Denmark, there's a very strong tradition for the belief in the value of the spoken living word and the value of public enlightenment through lectures dating back to the mid-1800s. In all its incarnations, the association followed this practice as a key activity, both in Copenhagen, where most of the activities took place, and in the local branches. As seen in the lower right-hand corner, larger meetings took place, this one with 3,000 participants, about a group of Soviet pilots who had flown over the Arctic. Such lectures often included artistic performances and readings of pro-Soviet Danish writers. If there were only a few persons, an activist of SUV could come to your home for a so-called living room meeting, where various AV materials such as pictures or posters were shown and recordings of the meetings played. Other activities included summer parties with public lectures, music and dancing. And SUV also operated a travel agency that sold cheap summer holidays to the USSR in cooperation with Intourist. In the late 1930s, SUV rented an office space in inner Copenhagen, large enough to house the administrative functions, a library that was open to the public, a bookshop, and rooms for well-received and well-visited photo exhibition on the USSR. As perhaps noted by the mentioning of the summer parties, aside from the promotion of pro-Soviet positions through art and lectures, SUV also held a social function. Outdoor summer parties with lectures, music, dancing, and so forth took place every year. They organized a tent camp for the members near the beach outside of Copenhagen at the Bay of Køge. Sadly, the pictures have been lost, but when they existed, they showed a tent camp with an SUV flag flying in the summer sky above. Others stayed in Copenhagen and played volleyball on a court in a common green provided by the local municipality. Alas, the good times did not last. The high point had been the celebrations of the 20th anniversary of the Bolshevik takeover. The low point was the unconditional defense of the Soviet annexations of the Baltic states, parts of Poland, and the war against Finland. Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany in April 1940. But the two friendships associations were not banned until the day of Operation Barbarossa. Perhaps the best example on this development is Martin Andersen Nexø, who had returned to Denmark, to communism, and to the chairmanship of the SUV. His defense of the Soviet war against Finland made him so unpopular that bookshops refused to carry his books, and private libraries organized public burnings of them. Later, he was arrested and had, upon his release due to high age, he fled to Sweden and from there to the Soviet Union, when he became the first Danish speaker on Radio Moscow. When in 1945 he returned home, he was extremely popular and celebrated. The public change of mood must be explained by the role of the Red Army in the war and the leading role of Danish communists in the resistance movement. The chairman of the other friendship association, Professor Albert Olsen, also had to flee to Sweden, while others, such as SUV secretary and former secretary, his name was Harry Jensen, and the former secretary Otto Melchior, both communists, died in German concentration camps. When the associations were forbidden and disbanded, their archives disappeared, most likely burned as not to fall into the hands of the Germans. A small group of activists participated in the resistance movement by publishing an illegal journal shown here, with news on the resistance struggle, Soviet victories in the war, and article on the development in the Soviet Union. Following the liberation, work in the friendship associations began anew, both in Copenhagen with the local and with local branches across the country. Professor Stender Petersen played such a leading role that he was later denied access to the USA, and for that reason could not accept a professorship he was offered at Columbia University. However, the key figures were the national chairman, Professor of History Albert Olsen, and after his sudden and unexpected death in 1949, Professor of Philosophy Jørgen Jørgensen. At the same time, on Soviet insistence, the two organizations merged into one under the name of the smaller Danish-Russian Corporation. In 1952, the name was changed to the Society for Cooperation between Denmark and the Soviet Union. Aside from continuing the tradition of public lectures with both Danish and Soviet speakers, the society organized a string of cultural events. Delegations traveled to the USSR. They were paid for by the Soviet side, with the intention of disseminating positive impressions upon returning home. Cultural delegations of various artists were invited to Denmark and performed across the country. The local branches asked for artists instead of boring speakers who had, in addition, had to be translated as they only spoke Russian. And a very popular event was the screening of Soviet films, usually and especially during the public Easter holiday. From 1947 to 1955, the Society published a journal very similar in content to the old journals of the SUV. Travel impressions, positive stories on social economic developments, and Soviet foreign policy initiatives. Perhaps the position of the journal is best presented in the picture of the little girl sewing a flag with the text, "Stalin is peace." The journal folded due to poor sales. The society operated a very popular travel agency. It became a major stakeholder in the Danish market for tourist groups going to the USSR. Everybody from high school students and university students to trade union members and mushroom pickers made use of the travel agency. They cooperated with the travel agency of the Soviet Central Trade Union, Centralist, who had the best connections across the USSR to make specified trips. The work of the travel agency was the major source of income, together with the secret Soviet funding.
Kim, 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. Okay. So in 1975, a building was cased in central Copenhagen, where the activities took place. There were some very popular cultural days where each Soviet republic was presented to the public. But things came to an end in 1992 with the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, the communists leaving the organization, and only those who were genuinely interested in Russian culture and socio-economic developments and so on and so forth, history, stayed. And the main point at this point was that they needed a break with the past. The society changed its name to the Danish-Russian Association. It was decided that it should never again serve the interests of either a Danish political party or a certain foreign power, that there should be room for discussion as long as it was in a sober tone, and that it should continue activities. So slowly work started again with various cultural events and public lectures, the most important being the annual Russian conference in the building of the Danish Parliament since 1989, where Russian representatives of the Russian state, of various researchers, and also members of the opposition, Anna Politkovskaya, visited Denmark as a guest for participating in a conference. And also Danish experts spoke, and all of it was with simultaneous interpretation, so that everyone could express their point of view. Many difficulties arose since 2014 due to Russian revanchism, and I'm not saying that we in the West won the Cold War and now Russia has to do what we say. I'm saying that perhaps many opportunities were lost during the 1990s. But that does not explain away the official Russian revanchism or excuse the war in the Ukraine. But at first, business as usual continued. The reorganization of the association with freedom of debate proved its strength, that disagreeing is not the same as Russophobia, even when a few members advocated a return to the pre-1991 position. But the free and open debate continued, even if it became more difficult to operate. Then came the full-scale invasion, and despite the press release of the National Executive Committee condemning the war and the invasion, media representatives called not because they wanted an expert comment. The name of the association, the logos, and misunderstanding of the history and position of the association led to a media assumption that the association was pro-Putin. Despite the actions and developments since 1992, despite the latest conferences with a critical position on the actions of the Russian state in the Ukraine. And once again, the association needed to reinvent itself. So just a few conclusions, if I'm not completely out of time. I'm making my conclusions now as an outsider and researcher observing the developments. I think that there is still a need for a Danish-Russian organization, but it must continue based on the conclusions of 1992 of no longer providing unconditional support, but depart from a not necessarily uncritical position. And a number of hard questions must be answered. Some of them are regarding the name, the logo, the articles of association, the purpose statement. It must be considered what to do when a younger generation doesn't join, but event shop. It must be considered whether a bilateral or more multilateral approach without accepting the Russian state dogma of the near abroad would be more effective. There must be considerations about the advent of social media and what it does for organizations and constructions of them. It must be considered how to use technological advances for dissemination, and what will be the Russia that comes out of this war. That's the difficult questions. I don't have the answer, and luckily I'm not the one who should provide them. But I'm looking forward to the rest of our discussion today, and I will say thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kim. Very impressive. And I see already many similarities to Finland-Russia Society's history, and we will have time to discuss it more. I understood, Kim, that the booklet you have published in your association, it's possible to spread to participants after this session. So we will have possibility to read more if we want.
Yeah, I made an English translation. It's a draft, so it's okay to share if someone wanted, but please don't make it public in any way. It's just for reading. Thank you.
Yes. I think we have to go forward, and we will leave the questions for Kim also in the end of our seminar. And now we are moving to Great Britain, and we have here warmly welcome David Brummel. Am I pronouncing right your name?
Absolutely, Riku.
Yes.
Fantastic.
So warmly welcome. We are happy to hear your association's, your society's story today, and you can start sharing the slides.
Can Kim close his slides?
Now it should be possible.
Yes, can you see my first?
Yes, we can see them.
In fact, this is the first slide with the title. Well, thank you very much, Riku, for that kind introduction. First, on behalf of the Great Britain-Russia Society, may I thank the Finland-Russia Society for your kind invitation to this important international seminar and for having organized such an interesting event. Secondly, my fellow members of the GB Russia Society and I would like to express our warmest congratulations to the Finland-Russia Society on your 80th anniversary. By contrast with the Finnish and Danish societies, the Great Britain-Russia Society is a relatively new organization. We were only established in 2002. However, our predecessor organization, the Great Britain USSR Association, goes back quite a bit further. The association was founded in 1959 at the height of the Cold War. The principal purpose of the association was to provide a non-political channel for cultural contacts of all kinds between the UK and the USSR. The association was sponsored and funded by the British Foreign Office, and as an illustration of the importance of the association, three of the association's first four presidents were former prime ministers of the United Kingdom: Clement Attlee, Harold Macmillan, and Harold Wilson. John Roberts was the association's director from 1973 to 1993, and he wrote a marvelous book about his experiences as the director of the association, in a book which was published in 2000, titled Speak Clearly into the Chandelier, Cultural Politics Between Britain and Russia, 1973 to 2000. And this is a picture of the front cover of the book. Now, throughout the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, the association was involved in arranging a variety of visits throughout that period. Sometimes well-known figures were involved. A notable such case was the official visit by the celebrated Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin in July 1961. And as you will see from this slide, during this period, the association was involved in organizing visits by a variety of distinguished figures. The poets Yevgeny Yevtushenko and Andrei Voznesensky, the Russian and Kyrgyz novelist Chingiz Aitmatov, the great film director Andrei Tarkovsky, and Sergei Zaligin, the chief editor of Novy Mir, New World, the literary journal. But it wasn't all sweetness and light. Sometimes geopolitical events conspired to make the everyday task of organizing cultural visits and exchanges more difficult. A classic example of this was the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan on the 25th of December, Christmas Day, 1979. Understandably, the association's president, Sir Harold Wilson, and John Roberts had to cancel their scheduled visit to Moscow in January 1980. The invasion inevitably had a chilling effect on UK-Soviet relations, and the association did not undertake any major new initiatives with the Soviet Union throughout 1980. Despite this, the association's then chairman, Sir John Lawrence, strongly emphasized the importance of maintaining the bridges between the two countries by maintaining human and cultural contacts where this was possible. And sometimes visits had unforeseen and even dramatic consequences. One such visit took place in September 1983. This was when Yuri Lyubimov, the celebrated theatre director and founder of the Taganka Theatre in Moscow, arrived in London to start work on his production of a stage adaptation of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment at the Lyric Theatre in Hammersmith. At Lyubimov's request, John Roberts arranged for him to have an interview with a British newspaper. And on the 5th of September 1983, the record of Lyubimov's interview duly appeared in the London Times. In the interview, Lyubimov had in fact launched a coruscating attack on Soviet censorship in the cultural sphere, with particular regard to the theatre. Unsurprisingly, a publication of the interview attracted a lot of attention. One of its positive consequences was that the remaining tickets for the run of the play immediately sold out. But in certain quarters, the interview caused a veritable furore. A Soviet diplomat publicly rebuked Lyubimov in the foyer of the theatre. Преступление совершено, наказание последует. A crime has been committed. Your punishment will follow. In July 1984, Yuri Lyubimov was duly deprived of his Soviet citizenship, and he wasn't to return to Russia until 1992. Following the failed coup against Gorbachev in August 1991, things began to unravel very quickly in the USSR. In December 1991, the USSR was dissolved, Gorbachev resigned, Boris Yeltsin became president of the Russian Federation. And on the 29th of January 1992, the GB-USSR Association changed its name to the Britain-Russia Centre. Ian Elliott served as the director of the Britain-Russia Centre with great skill and determination from April 1993 to December 1999. The breakup of the Soviet Union meant that it was now possible to have direct cultural contacts through non-official channels. There was no longer any need to route everything through official channels in Moscow. In consequence, there was a huge increase in direct bilateral contacts of all kinds, not only with Russia, but also with the other countries which were formerly part of the USSR. In this new situation, there was a question mark over the future of what was now the Britain-Russia Centre and its official role. Eventually, in March 2002, the Britain-Russia Centre ceased operating as a membership society. At this point, we were faced with the bleak prospect that this meant the end of the organisation. However, one particular member, Daniel Salpstein, together with 4 colleagues, had the bright idea of setting up a new organisation. Thus it was that in October 2002, the Great Britain-Russia Society emerged, phoenix-like as the reincarnation of the original Great Britain-USSR Association. Over the next 17 years, Daniel Salpstein built the society into the thriving and successful organisation it became under his leadership. Stuart Thom succeeded Daniel as chairman in 2008 and then served as chairman until March 2019. During this period, Stuart built to good effect on Daniel's earlier good work. I was honoured to take over as chairman from Stuart Thom in March 2019. Daniel Salpstein was deservedly awarded an honour, an OBE, in the Queen's New Year Honours List in January 2013 for services to promote UK-Russia mutual understanding. In early August 2020, Daniel sadly passed away. We decided to establish a series of memorial lectures in Daniel's honour in recognition of his unique role in the creation and development of the society. Since 2021, a Daniel Salpstein Memorial Lecture has been held in September each year. This year's Memorial Lecture was delivered by Dame Deborah Bronnet, who served as the UK's ambassador to Moscow from 2020 to 2023. Dame Deborah gave us a very enlightening talk on the UK-Russia relationship, helpfully considering this from the long-term point of view. She concluded her talk with a powerful and uplifting message. We should not stop supporting Ukraine, but at the same time, we should not give up on Russia or Russians. Now, I'll give you a brief description of the Great Britain-Russia Society and its aims and objectives. When the society was founded in October 2002, it was established as an independent, non-political and non-governmental UK charity. We have no connection with the Russian government or the British government, or indeed with any other government. Our primary mission is an educational one. The Society's principal purpose is to educate the public by promoting a wider and deeper knowledge, appreciation and understanding of Russia and its near neighbours. To do this, we focus on all aspects of the culture, history, and politics, as well as the economies and societies of Russia and its near neighbors. The term near neighbors for these purposes includes all the countries which were formerly republics of the USSR. Our patron is His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent. He has proved to be a very supportive and appreciative patron of our society, not least in these difficult times for Anglo-Russian relations. And he takes a close interest in our work. Prince Michael attends our meetings when he can and was pleased to attend this year's Daniel Selpstein Memorial Lecture in September. Our honorary president is Professor Geoffrey Hosking, OBE, a distinguished British historian of Russia and the Soviet Union. We currently have about 200 plus members, including ambassadors and professors, both former and serving, and there is a wealth of expertise and specialist knowledge amongst our membership. We strive to be an inclusive and outward-looking organization. By this, I mean that we welcome as members anyone with an interest in Russia and the countries of the former Soviet Union. And we welcome members wherever they may be based, whether overseas or within the UK, and irrespective of nationality. We set out to achieve our objectives in two principal ways, as you can see by a talks program of around 15 to 20 lectures each year on various topics relating to Russia and the other former members of the Soviet Union. And secondly, we seek to achieve our objectives by publishing the Society's journal, East-West Review, which is a high-quality illustrated publication with articles on a wide array of topics as well as book reviews. This next slide shows the front cover of the autumn 2024 issue of East-West Review. The Society is basically run by its committee. We are all unpaid volunteers. We have a vice chairman, a secretary and treasurer, and also a membership secretary. We send out a newsletter to our members at regular intervals. This provides updates on the latest news and forthcoming events. And we have an annual members meeting, which gives the committee and our members an opportunity to review progress, take stock, and together to think about the Society's future direction of travel. Now, the next few slides, I'll give you some idea of the kinds of events we have. I'm sure you're all familiar with Ekaterina Schulman, who you can see there, who spoke to us in January 2020. Sergei Guriev, the celebrated economist, a brilliant economist, is very well known throughout Europe. And Grigory Yavlinsky, who spoke to us in 2005, is also an economist and the well-known opposition politician who was, of course, formerly leader of the Liberal Social Yabloko Party. These are some examples of talks between 2020 and 2021. I won't read out the titles of these talks, but I'll just mention that the talk by a Riga-based Medusa journalist in October 2021 about the challenges for journalists who have been designated by the Russian government as a foreign agent, inosrani agent, was very, very interesting, but also very, very disturbing. And these are examples of some talks in 2022. The talk we had by Rob Lee, a military analyst and former US Marine officer, he gave this 3 weeks before the invasion on the 24th of February, and he gave us a remarkably accurate prediction of what, unfortunately, was to happen. Sergei Loznitsa's fascinating talk in July of that year, I would just mention that that took place shortly after the British premiere of Loznitsa's magnificent film, Mr. Landsbergis, which is about Lithuania's successful fight for independence from the USSR between 1989 and 1991. We've had numerous talks from other countries which were which are also formerly part of the USSR, as you will see, from Armenia to Ukraine, and including Estonia, Moldova, and Kazakhstan. I would like to conclude, if I may, with a few remarks about the present situation and the future. The war in Ukraine continues to cast its long shadow, and Russia's external aggression, as we all know, has been accompanied by intense and comprehensive internal repression. We all recognize that the present situation, to put it mildly, continues to be difficult for any Russia-related friendship, society, or association. In this situation, in our society, we have sought to keep at the forefront of our minds our core educational mission, and we sought to ensure that, as far as possible, we continue to present an accurate picture of current events in both Ukraine and Russia. At the same time, we need to recognize that a regime is not the same as its people. And so we strongly believe that there can be no question of boycotting or canceling Russia or Russian culture. Let us not forget the many positive aspects of Russian culture. The 3 Zoom talks we've had over the last year by speakers based in Russia illustrate the kind of approach we're seeking to take. As you can see, on 3 very different topics: British literature in Russia, the current state of the Russian economy, and an overview of Soviet art. We believe that it is vitally important to continue with this kind of cross-cultural exchange and to maintain personal contact with people in Russia. Keeping the bridges open in this way will enable an ongoing dialogue. This will be of enormous value in promoting better understanding between the peoples of our 2 countries. I should add that this approach has the wholehearted support of Prince Michael, our patron, who has emphasized that while it isn't always the easiest thing to do, it is of prime importance to keep the doors to Russian open. So, to summarize, let us continue to support Ukraine, but let us not give up on Russia or Russians. Let us keep the bridges open. Pushkin will outlive Putin. And let us not give up hope that there will be a free and democratic Russia in the future. Прекрасная Россия будущего, a beautiful Russia of the future. Thank you. I'm very happy to answer any questions now or in the general discussion later. I hope I kept to time, Riku.
Yes, thank you, David. You are perfectly in time. So 20 minutes we agreed, and 20 minutes you made it. Thank you for a brilliant presentation, and I think that many of us can agree with many of the theses you had and conclusions you had, and we will discuss definitely them at the end of our seminar. And now we go straight to the last part of our seminar presentations, and we will come back to Finland. Now it's time to compare Finnish situation with those situations we have heard earlier today. And we have Professor Simo Mikkonen from Eastern Finland University. He is also our favorite historian in Finland-Russia Society's history. He has written with Pia many articles on our history, and it's always a pleasure to listen to you, Simo. Warmly welcome.
Thank you. Now you should be able to see my slides.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Yes, indeed. I mean, I have somewhat similar background to Pia. So I'm also a historian specialized in Soviet, mostly cultural history, but also, I mean, Cold War era cultural exchanges. And as Riku said, I mean, I've done quite some research on Soviet cultural diplomacy, but also Finnish Soviet cultural exchanges, which has led me to investigate quite a bit the Finnish Soviet society's history as well. And therefore, I mean, my focus, I mean, I won't be talking much about Finnish-Russian society. I mean, I have some remarks towards the end, but I mean, more about, I mean, the origins of the Finnish Soviet society and 50 years, almost 50 years of its existence. To begin with, I mean, it's good that we've heard both about, I mean, Danish society and also from the British perspective, because Finland comes somewhere in between. It was the biggest of at least in the West, the biggest society, friendship society with the Soviet Union, with several 100,000 participants at some points. So it had a very broad membership base to begin with. The problem, of course, speaking about the Finnish Soviet society, is that it's a huge topic, and I could go on for a couple of hours very easily. I mean, just talking about the society, and now I have to squeeze it into 20 minutes, but I'll do my best. And I'll also, I mean, I will focus on cultural exchanges, which was one of the main areas of activity of the society. And by focusing on cultural exchange, I mean, I feel that I can also raise some problems, I mean, related to the society's work and which are also, I think, features that have also affected, I mean, Finnish-Russian society later on. And there were, of course, other areas of activity like enlightenment, different kinds of entertainment, educational work like teaching of Russian language and so on within the society. But cultural exchanges was really one of the main areas. So unlike in Denmark and many other countries, I mean, there was no Finnish Soviet society in the interwar years, in the 20s and 30s. And then all of a sudden, after 1944, we had one of the biggest friendship societies with the Soviet Union in the whole Western world, even though Finland is a quite small country. I mean, just nowadays, I mean, 5.6 million people living here. So I'll start with a rough chronology of society's different stages, because I mean, when I've been going through, I mean, Finnish Soviet society's history, I mean, it changes in some ways quite a lot during those almost 50 years. And then again, certain things don't change at all. And many of the changes are related to changes in Soviet foreign policy, which seems to quite neatly, actually, I mean, fall into this periodization of mine. So first, there's this politicized phase from the end of the war until the mid-55. Those who know Finnish history, we call, I mean, the first post-war years as the perilous years, vaaran vuodet in Finnish, which means the years when Finland was in a kind of a imminent danger of falling deeper into the Soviet influence and maybe becoming a communist state or kind of a people's democracy. So, I mean, as what happened in Poland and Hungary, for example. But this kind of a politicized phase, I mean, continues until the thaw. Then we have a kind of a period which I call, well, I mean, if I look at it from the point of view of Finnish Soviet society, of seeking of new routes. So what's coming next for the society? Then we have the late Soviet period from mid-60s onwards, which is really the peak of the influence of the society, and kind of you could see that its influence in the Finnish society is at its largest. Then kind of a diversification towards the end of the Soviet era, and then it changes in the Finnish-Russia Society after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But if we look at, I mean, more in detail to these different periods, we have to begin with the perilous years, so the immediate post-war years, which was, I mean, the name comes from the situation being, I mean, very perilous for Finland, huge influence of the Soviet Union after Finland losing already a second war to the Soviet Union in 1944. First was the Winter War from 1939 to 40, and then the continuation war from 41 until 44. There are also very important internal changes in Finnish politics, and one of them is the legalization of the Finnish Communist Party, which really changes, I mean, the Finnish political landscape. And the final thing that's also very important from the Finnish perspective is that there was little hope of help coming from the West. Basically, I mean, the Western countries abandoned Finland for the as a Soviet area of influence in the immediate post-war years. So at this situation, Finnish-Soviet society is being established in autumn of 1944. So it's completely new society. It's definitely, it's not part of the Finnish Communist Party, but at the same time, many of its leaders and always the general secretary of the Finnish Soviet Society, I mean, throughout the existence of the Soviet Union, usually comes from the Finnish Communist Party, and also many of its key members. Not all, usually, I mean, the chairman is not a communist, but it's also at the same time, the communist influence is a big one there. Also, especially, I mean, for these cultural actions, I mean, some of the people from Finnish cultural elite, non-communists, also join the Finnish Soviet Society, as do some non-communist politicians at the start. Yeah. So, and well, I mean, it's a bit polemically said, it's supposed to be a cultural organization, that's basically in the basic charter of the Finnish Soviet Society, that it tries to promote cultural exchange between Finland and the Soviet Union. But the problem is that, I mean, in the immediate post-war situation, I mean, there weren't, for example, I mean, you couldn't export any Finnish culture to the Soviet Union, and we'll come to that in a moment. So from January 1945, there is a huge influx of Soviet ensembles and Soviet artists to Finland in January, February, March of 1945. So you could call it the first major campaign of Soviet cultural exchanges or influence in Finland. Red Army Choir, for example, but many others, Moiseyev Ensemble, many very notable artists, musicians especially, some dancers, movie directors, writers coming to Finland in Soviet delegations. You do see in a post-war setting, I mean, you definitely see similar tours made to other Soviet-occupied countries in the post-war years, but only after the war with Germany has ended. You have to remember that this spring of 1945, the war in Europe is still ongoing. The Germany hasn't still surrendered, but yet you have, I mean, huge Soviet cultural influx into Finland. So Finland is a kind of a laboratory, you could say, later adapted to other Soviet-occupied countries. Finland was not occupied, but I mean, at the same time, under very huge Soviet influence. The Finnish Soviet Society was the one that was arranging these tours. So Soviet Union made the decisions of who it will send to Finland, the Red Army Choir, so on. So the society couldn't really decide who would be coming, but it had to arrange basically these tours in Finland. But then again, I mean, very odd thing from the society's perspective happened after a few months. So there were 6 big ensembles and numerous musicians, dancers, other artists coming to Finland within few months. And then all of a sudden, it all ended at the end of March 1945. The Finnish Soviet Society, I mean, kept asking. I mean, I've read the letters. I mean, they keep asking that please do send more artists to Finland, and none come through. I mean, at the end of the 1945, only from spring 46 onward, it continues. And this is the point where I became interested in what was the logic behind this. Why they send artists, then they stop it, and it's all about, I mean, the Soviet agenda when they do send artists in these post-war years. And then when I made kind of calculations of when the Soviet Union was sending this very large group of artists to Finland, they seemed to coincide with Finnish elections. There were parliamentary elections in spring 1945 when there was a huge influx of Soviet artists. And they keep repeating it. I mean, whenever there's a presidential elections or parliamentary elections in the post-war years, you keep getting these Soviet artists to Finland. And beyond that, I mean, there wasn't much of cultural exchange. This does continue only until the mid-50s, and then it basically stops. I mean, after that, I mean, there is no coincidence between Finnish elections and Soviet cultural exchange. But during the Stalin years, I mean, I know that Stalin dies in 1953, but this seems to be going on until the presidential elections in January 1956. You have this huge influx of Soviet cultural troupes to Finland. I drew maps because usually, I mean, if you had foreign cultural troupes coming to Finland, I mean, they usually just visited Helsinki, maybe Tampere or Turku or some other major city. But usually these Soviet ensembles, I mean, they toured throughout the whole Finland. And this was especially visible, I mean, when there were elections, that they basically, I mean, they had very large scale tours all around Finland. And I've drawn these maps where you can see that they basically, I mean, cover almost whole of Finland, I mean, in their tours. And some of the locals these are very small villages that they visit. So it's not just big cities. I mean, Finland is quite sparsely populated. So kind of, I mean, if I sum up the Stalin years and this first 10 years of Finnish Soviet society, I mean, it seems to be that cultural exchange is subordinated to Soviet foreign politics. So there is quite clear attempt by the Soviet Union of trying to influence Finnish population and kind of even their electoral behavior. Another very important feature is that it's a one-way street. So there are no Finns going to the USSR, especially, I mean, not in as part of any cultural exchange. So basically, the society had to implement Soviet cultural exchange, and it didn't have any control. So it was forced basically to reiterate Soviet propaganda and take care of Soviet foreign political objectives. It was also connected to the far left. Well, I mean, I've gone through these different features of how it was basically at this time mostly controlled by communists and had far left membership. This does change. I mean, from the mid-50s onwards, this definitely changed. And one of the main reasons is that the Soviet Union is changing after the Stalin years. Under Khrushchev, I mean, foreign politics begin to change. They gave a lot of emphasis on bilateral cultural diplomacy. So Soviets basically trying to present communism, but at the same time, they open up the borders for foreign influences. So the bilateralism becomes really the kind of the headline of Soviet cultural diplomacy during the Khrushchev years. It brings new features into cultural exchange, like commercial cooperation. So in Finland, the Finnish Soviet Society is not the only organization that imports Soviet artists into Finland, but there are many commercial establishments doing this. At the same time, it means that the Finnish Soviet Society needs to seek a new role for itself because it doesn't anymore have monopoly over Soviet cultural exchange, the Soviet-Finnish cultural exchange. And at the same time, the Soviet Union is seeking broader cooperation with Finnish society. So the society still keeps importing Soviet culture. There are world-class artists included, but it's also, changes into entertainment slowly, especially, during the 1960s, bringing big troupes like Moscow's Great Circus and so on. And these, especially, in music, dance, it's, you could say that, it's other organizations, professional organizations that start importing Soviet culture. But during the late 50s and 60s, there is some competition between the Finnish Soviet Society and some of the commercial establishments. And at the same time, the society is not bilateral per se. So the Finnish Soviet Society doesn't really export Finnish culture to the Soviet Union, but it exists in order to import Soviet culture to Finland. So this also causes some of the imbalance in exchange. So that's, the Finnish Soviet Society does help some Finnish organizations to get in touch with Soviet organizations, but it's not any of its core activity. So it doesn't really exist to export Finnish culture. And then moving on to the peak of the Soviet-Finnish society, so from the mid 60s onwards, which I've also called kind of the era of interaction, because then you can see that at the Soviet Union is not anymore, very focused on culture like it is during the Khrushchev era, when they put a lot of emphasis on cultural diplomacy. During the Brezhnev era, it does exist. That you still have agreements on cultural exchanges with Western countries, but they are not a priority anymore. So the authority trickles down in the Soviet bureaucracy to cultural organization, and they get quite a lot of leeway, and even though the politics and ideology are still there, they don't, the high party leadership is not that interested in what's happening in cultural exchange anymore. And in Finland, this means a very visible change especially to the post-war years, but also to late 50s and early 60s. The society, for example, the Finnish Soviet Society becomes much more active. So if it's at the beginning, it was basically, doing the Soviet bidding and kind of just following what the Soviet Union said that it should do, kind of tending, whatever the Soviet Union was doing and following it. From the late 60s onwards, the Finnish Soviet Society is much more proactive and kind of active in this cultural exchange. It encourages Finnish initiatives, helps different Finnish organizations to get in touch with the Soviet Union, helps in all kinds of Finnish projects. And also non-communist involvement in Finnish Soviet society greatly increases from the late 60s onwards. At the same time, the society assumes a kind of a semi-official role. So the society is present whenever there are state visits from the Soviet Union. It has representation in many government organs in Finland. It gets major funding from the Finnish government, which is, of course, a good thing. But at the same time, it kind of is very much involved in government, in different kinds of politics with the Soviet Union. Also, there are a lot of politicians from all parties as members, so no longer, dominated by the Communist Party, but a lot of different from the right to the left.
Timo, 3 minutes.
Yes. So the last decade, there are no fundamental changes, when it comes to the Finnish Soviet Society, although you can see a lot of expansion, when it comes to activities and the base of the society. There is increasing interest in counterculture like Soviet rock, minorities, so not just, Russian and for Finnish Soviet Society, Estonia was always a major area, but more towards other minorities in the Soviet Union. Yet the basic emphasis remained the same. So promoting the Soviet system. Also, I mean, the society basically never ever criticizes Soviet policies. And even though, I mean, the membership base is diversified, the uncritical attitude towards the Soviet Union is still there. So it never wanes off. Ideology, politics, I mean, when it comes to cultural exchange, even though, I mean, it's very beneficial for Finland in many ways, they are still there. So kind of as a kind of a conclusion here, so the society was never free of politics. When we talk about the Finnish Soviet society, especially, the main focus was culture, but largely on Soviet terms. And this is because, I mean, there was no Soviet civic society that existed. All activities were controlled by the government. So this was always a major problem for Finnish Soviet society as well. At first, I mean, the society did serve, I mean, just basically, I mean, Soviet foreign policy, but later on it became more proactive, helping all kinds of Finnish organizations, but it never did anything that was considered anti-Soviet or never supported such activities. So, and the last thing that the Finnish Soviet society was biased for imports and the reciprocity, so bilateral, I mean, connections were really secondary for it. After 1992, the focus on civic society has become much more important, and as far as I can see in Finnish-Russia society. So that's one major difference. Also, very important feature after the collapse of the Soviet Union is that the whole society, Finnish-Russia society, is much less centrally controlled than the Finnish Soviet society ever was, and which has also, I mean, seen, I mean, through diversification of its activities. So I'll end it there. Thank you for your attention, and I hope we have a good discussion.
Thank you, Simo. A lot. There was much new information even for me of our society, and thank for all of our experts. You have made a great job in short time. You have given for us a picture about friendship society movement in different countries, and this is a good basis for continuation of our discussion. And now it is possible to have some questions for our experts. You can lift your hand and give your question for some of them or for all of them. And maybe I could start with my question to start the discussion. Maybe this is for Pia. Firstly, we have heard a lot about bilateral contacts between one country and Soviet Union or Russia. But how about the international connections between the friendship organizations in Europe? Was there some kind of networks between different organizations, or were the connections only bilateral?
Thank you very much, Riku. That's a good question. There were, of course, contacts between the different friendship organizations, friendship societies, and there were, besides friendship societies, there were these sort of Soviet-sponsored pro-Soviet international transnational organizations like World Peace Council and which also kind of united these different types of organizations. But I don't know if there was ever any kind of bigger institution for the friendship societies. In the Soviet Union, there was this kind of Soviet body for controlling friendship societies abroad, but I don't know about this, if there was any kind of international sort of a coordinating body.
Thank you, Pia. Kim, do you want to
Yes,
continue?
can I make a short comment on this?
Yes.
So I have found in the Danish old Danish Soviet Association, I can see there was some kind of cooperation between the friendship associations in Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. They met every year from sometime in the late 1960s and until the 1980s. They had an annual meeting with the Soviet participation, and it was 1 year in Finland and the next year in Sweden or in Denmark, and so on and so forth. So every year they met for a weekend to discuss plans, to give suggestions, what works, what doesn't work. There was some input from the Soviet side, what they would like. Sadly, the archives, at least in Denmark, are incomplete. So, but there was some kind of cooperation.
Thank you. This is maybe one topic that should be more researched in the future. Let's get some more questions. You can also open your mic if you don't find the hand and just ask the question. We have now almost 17 minutes to our discussion, so let's make it fruitful. And our experts can also have some questions to others. David, you seem to have some questions to our Finnish colleagues.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Riku. Well, maybe to you, actually.
Okay.
Well, one of the most staggering comparative facts is that we have about 200 members in the Great Britain-Russia Society, and the Finland-Russia Society has 5,000. Well, our mind boggles at that. So I'm intrigued as to why it is such a large number. I gather previously it was even larger, but is it because you've always been acutely aware of the big neighbour next door, not always in a friendly way? But how? That's one part of my question. The other part is, how do you actually manage that large number of members? Do you allow the branches to do their own thing, or do you try and give any kind of direction from the centre in Helsinki, as it were? Or your colleagues, your Finnish colleagues, will have views. But as you're the director, I thought you might like to deal with that in the first instance.
Okay, I can try to shortly start, and maybe Simo can then comment, is 5,000 members much, or is it not so much when we compare to history? Yeah, 5,000 members, we think that it's quite a small number at the moment, and we would like to have more members, but still we think that it's quite a good number when we compare to other Finnish societies in different areas. So I think we can be quite proud. Of course, because Finland Soviet Union society and after Finland-Russia Society had been so big organizations, they have also had always grants from Finnish government, from Ministry of Culture and Education, and our society has had traditionally quite good resources for its work. We have had many workers. In history, I don't know, maybe Simo knows the number best, or Pia, how many workers we used to have in history, maybe even some 100 workers in the best years. Last years, we used to have 10 workers in our society, which still is quite a big number. But this year we have left only one worker, and you can see him here, because first time in our society's history, the Finnish government didn't give for us any grants anymore. we can speak a long time about this question. This is internal political question in Finland at the moment, that there is no finances for any societies anymore, and of course the societies somehow connected to Russia are in the big risks at the moment, because it's the easy object for all the governments and politicians. But maybe Simo or Pia will continue about the workers or member number.
Well, I mean, I can really speak only about, I mean, the Finnish Soviet Society time. So about the time when before the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I mean, back then it was huge. I mean, the organization, I mean, it was huge. I mean, I think, I mean, there were definitely, I mean, more than 100 workers in the as a full-time workers in the Finnish Soviet Society. There was a travel office. I mean, there were, I mean, a number of local. I mean, I think the amount of local chapters was in hundreds. I mean, there were 300 to 400 at least. I mean, local chapters. I mean, there were regional societies as well, and the central organization was a major one. Definitely, I mean, it was way much smaller after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I think that, I mean, for a long time there were some tens of full-time workers in Finnish-Russia Society. Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully we answered for you, David. And now we have
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
one question in chat, and we have also one raised hand from Karl-Erik Foverskov. Karl-Erik, you are welcome.
Thank you so much for participating in this very, very interesting conference. It has been so much inspiring for me, and I hope I can speak also on the behalf of the other Danish representatives that are participating, that it has been a really interesting conference. I have only a practical question. Would it be possible for us, for the participants, to have a copy of the slides? Some of them would be worth a more detailed study, if that would be possible. So it's certainly the individual speakers that should answer this question. But Riku, would you take care of examining if this is possible, and then send it out to your mail list here from the participants? Thank you so much.
Yes, that's a good question. We can discuss with our experts the question after the session, and I will send the materials we are in free use for you. Thank you. And we have one question in chat that Pia already answered, but do you want to also have the question in loud and to answer the question?
Yes, I can just sort of say something. It was about this Society for Cooperation in Russian and Soviet Studies, which is a renamed organization of the organization Society for Cultural Relations with the USSR, founded in 1924 in Britain. Yeah, it seems, I don't know much about this organization. I actually found out today when I was doing my presentation, but it seems that it's still working, and I linked their website to the chat if you are interested in knowing more about it. I think in Britain there were actually different organizations during the interwar period and then in the post-war period. So it's an also an interesting case itself, why there were so many different organizations and how they developed.
David, you can comment if you want.
Yeah. Well, I'm very grateful to Pia for explaining the position so clearly. We are aware of that society. I hadn't been to any of its meetings. We do, from time to time, advertise their meetings, and it obviously is a very old organization. I think the reason for the Great Britain-USSR Association being created in 1959 was that this should be an organization focusing on the dissemination of Russian culture, Soviet culture, but without being too pro-Soviet, if you like. No doubt different people have different views, but there is a perception, I think, in certain British circles that some of those other organizations, this is during the Soviet period, were leaning too closely towards the Soviet regime, if I can put it that way. The GB-USSR Association, of course, although it was intended to be, if you like, a more neutral organization, it was actually not an NGO. It wasn't a non-governmental organization because it was sponsored and financed by the Foreign Office. So it is very interesting. And although we consider ourselves, the GB-Russia Society, if you like, as a successor organization to the GB-USSR Association, we are truly independent of government because we were established as a charity, etc., etc. So there's no problem that there are these different organizations in the UK, if you like, dealing with Russia. And there's also an organization which you may be aware of called Pushkin House, which is not a friendship society as such, but does an enormous amount to promote Russian culture, especially during this difficult period where certain cultural agencies in London might tend to regard any Russian culture as a toxic brand and not want to deal with it. So I think there's room for all these different societies and organizations. But thank you for mentioning those. And I would be very interested to see your slides and study them in more detail.
Yeah, I think this kind of nicely reflects the differences in different countries. I mean, it's not a similar pattern in every country. But yes, I can share my slides.
We have one more question in chat from Alla Hook. What are the main activities of the Danish and Finnish societies? Which of those activities do your members find most attractive? I can shortly answer from Finnish side. Of course, in history there have been different activities. At the moment, all kind of lectures, all kind of cultural activities, all activities that support the situation of education of Russian language in Finland is very popular in our society. And one interesting topic is Finno-Ugric activity, which is special for Finland because we have those contacts to our Finno-Ugric relative languages also living in Russia. So this maybe is one special topic. Do you want Kim comment from Danish side? And after that we have one more question from Joni Virkkunen.
Yeah, but I don't know if I should answer because Anne is the chairperson of the Danish Association, but I would say that it's still, and here you can correct me, Anne, it's still the spoken word, the public lectures on Russian society, the war, history, culture, and arts, and so forth. That is the main focus point of the Danish Association, along with some social events for members.
Do you want Anne comment?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the most amazing lecture today. It has been so interesting. We are working on Russian culture most in our group. And I think, thank you, David, for your positive comments. And we think that we shall not forget the positive aspects of Russian culture in those days, and we work for it.
Thank you. We have two questions. Joni, and I see Elizabeth is also asking for questions, so you can start, Joni.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Joni Virkkunen. I'm from the Karelian Institute at the University of Eastern Finland. Thank you for a very, very interesting seminar today. We've heard lots of interesting perspectives on Soviets and Russian societies. But I would like to ask a question, first of all, of our Finnish participants, but also something related to others. The Finnish Soviet and later Finnish-Russia Society has had not only this kind of diplomatic cultural exchange role, but at some point there was a clear role in developing paradiplomatic relations, meaning not only people-to-people cooperation, but also this kind of local level cooperation, including tourism and cross-border cooperation, twin city cooperation, and so on. So the question is, when did this happen? How would you evaluate the role of this paradiplomatic activities in the society? And then for others, did that kind of functions exist also in the Danish or UK societies? Thank you.
Who would like to start answer? Is it Pia or Simo?
I think Simo probably knows better. I think you have studied this or went through more sources than I have. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I would, yeah, I mean, thanks, Joni. I mean, it's a very good point, and definitely, I mean, I was focusing mostly on cultural exchange. But even from that perspective, I mean, I had that one title, the era of interaction, I mean, which is from the mid-16 onwards, and I think that's the point. I mean, when there begins to be quite a lot of connections of lower levels. So I mean, you cannot. I mean, with the Soviet Union, you cannot speak of a civic society, but more or less, I mean, connections, more and more kind of unofficial kind of connections, I mean, between different scholars and artists and just local activists. So I would kind of track, I mean, that kind of connections, I mean, into the mid-60s and from that onwards throughout the 70s and increasing, I mean, notably, I mean, along the 1980s.
Thank you. Do you want to comment, David, or Kim, from your side?
Do you want to go first, David, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Yeah. Undoubtedly, those kinds of contacts increased in a sense as the various things in the Soviet system became more relaxed, say in the Gorbachev era or even during the Brezhnev era. But in terms of the exchanges that I'm aware of, these all had to be done through official contacts. So reading the book by John Roberts, what amazed me was that everything had to go through the cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy in London. And the Foreign Office did keep quite a close eye on the contacts that were being pursued. And then one had to deal with our counterpart organization in Moscow, the USSR, Great Britain Society, as it was called. So I regarded the collapse of the Soviet Union, actually, but when I I'm not an expert in terms of the history, but reading John's book, it seemed to me that that was a tremendous sea change that was produced, because no longer did things have to go through Moscow center. And what was really quite extraordinary was that to invite a speaker from one of the other republics, you couldn't go to the capital of that republic. You had to go to Moscow. So the disintegration of the Soviet Union liberated all that up. And I think there was then a true positive explosion of contacts. But maybe I'm looking at it through slightly jaundiced eyes, as I say, but undoubtedly non-official contacts did continue and through the Soviet period, but they were difficult, and it was then very awkward for those in Russia. In a sense, we're seeing a not dissimilar position, regrettably, now, because the speakers we have had they've all been from Moscow. The three we had from Moscow last year, they were all by Zoom, and whether it would be feasible for them from a personal welfare and security point of view to travel over to England and give a talk to the GB-Russia Society, I honestly don't know.
Thank you. Kim, if you want to comment.
Yeah, I see a striking number of similarities between Great Britain, the Finland experience during the Soviet years, and the Danish experience, that everything had to go through the cultural attaché. There was the SSOD in Moscow. There was a Soviet organization as a friendship association with the country in question. All these things are the same. Many of the events were the same. It was many of the same people who traveled to various countries. When the Estonian Cultural Days took place in Denmark in the mid-1980s, the Estonian Soviet Republic had to organize similar events in 3 or 4 other countries as part of the plan. So there's a striking number of similarities. And that's the question of impact and people-to-people diplomacy. I would say, since everything had to go through the official channels, true people-to-people diplomacy, as far as I can see, took place when ordinary Danes traveled to the Soviet Union as part of tourist groups. And there are some examples when they are in a sanatory somewhere in the Caucasus Mountains or somewhere, where they meet ordinary Soviet citizens and have a dialogue that is outside the control of the official system. That's one of the few examples. And the question of impact. Of course, the Danish-Soviet Association always told Moscow that everything was going well and please send more money. And in the press, the artistic value of a violinist or group of folkloristic dancers or stuff like that was appraised for the artistic value more than an appraisal of Soviet power. So it's this impact. It's small islands. It's the meeting by chance somewhere in the Soviet Union as part of a tourist group. It's whenever someone from a delegation was able to disseminate in a circle or a journal or somewhere where communists usually didn't have any impact. But if the purpose of cultural diplomacy during the Soviet years was to use the culture to get sort of a sympathy for Soviet foreign policy and communism and so on, then the results were very meager compared to the enormous funding that went into it. But there are still some positive stories. I think that's a long answer that perhaps not entirely answered, but it's the best I have.
Thanks, Joni, for great question and great answers. And we are running out of our time officially, but I think we can continue still some minutes, because we have one question more. Maybe Elizabeth's question will be the last of this night. You're welcome, Elizabeth.
It's not actually a question. It's just a supplement, really, to the information that's come across from David, who's given a very full account. But I think it's worth mentioning that in the first post-Soviet years, the original GB-USSR Society which was the one that had been founded by an Act of Parliament way back in the late 50s and so on. That society was able suddenly to make many more contacts within the newly independent Russia and republics, and also to change the kind of contacts. For about, I suppose, for probably 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, there were links with aspiring politicians of all flavors, some of whom, alas, like Boris Nemtsov, are now dead. Yavlinsky came to London, and that whole political aspect was suddenly much larger and much more open on both sides. And there were also commercial links. We had visitors, I remember, that were interested in different branches of British industry, which was something that really hadn't happened at all before. It's not considered part of culture anyway, but there were a number of visits to different parts of the country organized by the society so that they could see how things like, I don't know, museums operated in, for instance, visited Burns's house and were able to draw some conclusions on how you could fund museums, because those kind of practical problems were suddenly open for discussion in a way they never had been in the Soviet period. Unfortunately, those things have dried up, of course. Nobody can do any of those things, but I mention it now as a hope that there will be a time when they can return and we can start doing those kind of links too. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your important comment, and maybe this hope is something we can get from this meeting, and maybe if we will conclude our meeting, I will firstly thank a lot our experts today. You have made great presentations, and also this discussion, even it was quite short, it was very fruitful for us, and I think that we should somehow continue this cooperation and maybe do some other seminars like this, and maybe to seek also for other countries if there is still existing societies and what kind of stories there are behind. I think that this was a start for something, and I'm very happy you all have come, and also we have had this our anniversary of 8 years of Finland-Russia Society, and I think this is for us very important, also find new starts and new initiatives for our future work. So thanks a lot for everyone for coming and spending a night time with us, and hopefully we will see later. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Riku. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you.